It was a revolution the world didn't see coming. An uprising that set off a chain reaction across North Africa and the Middle East. The Arab Spring was born in Tunisia, a revolt against repression inspired by an act of desperation and defiance. The actions of this man, a vegetable seller, Mohamed Bouazizi, forced the most powerful man in the country to flee. Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali, who ruled for more than 2 decades, brought down by anger and protest. The demands for political change were echoed in other countries. Protests in Egypt, a descent into violence in Libya, chaos and bloodshed in Syria and elsewhere. If the Arab Spring taught us anything, it is that there is no one easy way to remove a regime. And even when a revolution is considered successful, securing the ideals of that revolution can be even more difficult.
Tunisia is the only success story of the so-called Arab Spring, but at the same time it is in an incredibly unstable region.
There are still risks for the revolution not to succeed, that the battle is still long.
Actually, I'm afraid we are going back to a police state.
Tunisia has been widely praised. The country has been largely stable. Democratic elections, a new constitution, and a coalition government are held up as proof of progress. 4 Tunisian organisations even won the Nobel Peace Prize. But the country's economy is struggling. 3 major terror attacks have threatened stability. 5 years after Tunisia's revolution, hopes remain unfulfilled. There are again riots on the streets, the biggest protests since the uprising. For many, optimism has turned to disillusion and anger. Revolution Day. 5 years since the autocrat Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali escaped from the country. These Tunisians are proud of their revolution, a revolution that happened after thousands of people packed the streets of the capital to demand change. Back then, police snipers were ordered to shoot protesters. These days, people queue up to have their pictures taken with Tunisian special forces. It may be a photo op, but as an example of how far this country has come, it's an effective one.
The faces, in the eyes of the people, in their smiles, there is lots of optimism and lots of love to continue life in this after dictatorship.
Not everyone is satisfied though. Unemployment soared after the revolution. Many people don't trust Tunisia's new democratic leaders. And yet under Ben Ali, a public protest like this, calling for more jobs, would have been unthinkable. Tunisians can also now freely broadcast without being afraid. Criticism of the government is now common. The explosion in the number of radio and television companies, a reflection of Tunisia's infant democracy. The media here has opened up, no longer repressed, but still far from happy with the situation.
When Ben Ali is in power, we haven't the power.
When we sang before, there was a lot of problems and taboos. But after the revolution, we found freedom of speech, so we can express ourselves. We talk about everything we want.
On a trouvé l'expression.
For a long time, Tunisians couldn't talk about what they wanted. For most of its independence, the country has had only 2 leaders. President Habib Bourguiba, an autocrat but relative moderate, did a lot to improve women's rights, outlawing polygamy and establishing a minimum age for marriage. But in 1987, with Bourguiba's health failing, his new Prime Minister, Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali, seized power. Doctors declared Bourguiba too senile and ill to rule, and Ben Ali took his place in a bloodless coup. Despite pledges for democratic change, the country moved in the opposite direction. In a world of tapped phones and secret police, thousands of dissidents were either jailed or forced into exile. For the next 23 years, Ben Ali would rule alone. Any dissent would be crushed. Modern-day Tunisia is undoubtedly a different place. In the 5 years since Ben Ali fell, political discussion has flourished. This generation has been able to vote in largely fair elections, and power has shifted between the main political forces. A new constitution enshrined women's and religious rights, and a coalition government survives despite increasing parliamentary squabbles. The new president, Beji Said Essebsi, promises to meet the demands of the people, but the optimism of those early revolutionary days has faded. High expectations remain unfulfilled. And last year, 3 major terror attacks shook the country. The massacre at Sousse. Holidaymakers gunned down on the shores of the Mediterranean. In June last year, 38 people, mainly British tourists, were shot dead on the beach.